Hello, everybody. What's going on? My name is Jason Joseph, and this is another episode of Sharing the Mic with JJ. And today we have a very cool guest on. He's the Sixers insider for 102.5 The Gambler. He also is the founder of Pick Swap Media. You can also find him on Edge of Philly Sports and the Philly Sports Network. I hope I got everything right, but this is my man, Sean Barnard. How you doing, Sean?
Yeah, doing great, man. I appreciate you having me on. Been loving the hustle and the grind and all the work that you're putting out as well. So excited to chop it up with you, talk some Sixers and everything else. And yeah, once again, appreciative of the opportunity.
Oh no, dude, no. Like I've been following you. Like I told you off the air, I've been following you. I've been following RB. I've been following DJ and Mitch, and of course, like everything that you guys have been doing. It's just honestly, it's really inspirational because just seeing you guys put in the work that you do, it's definitely a reminder of like, I can do this.
hmm
And even though it's a little bit of like a different path, I still think that that's like what makes this whole platform so unique.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's a hustle, it's a grind, but one of the beauties of the world that we live in is it's equal opportunity for everyone. That if you want to go out and get it, you absolutely can. That you go put in the work, you put in the reps, you market yourself the right way, put in the effort, and are good enough at it. That the results is eventually find their way. So it isn't easy. It is a hustle. It's a struggle. It's a grind, but you gotta love it. And I can't complain about talking basketball all day, all the time.
Absolutely, man. No, I'm 1000% with you. I usually like to ask my guests the very first thing when they first come on the show, what a really cool moment that they had sharing the mic. You get that because it's called sharing the mic with JJ. So I always like to ask my guests if there was a really cool moment that they had sharing the mic with somebody. And I know that you've had some really cool guests on your on all your podcasts, but what would you say was like one of the most special moments that you got to have?
As far as sharing the mic, I'll probably say for me, it's being in the press room at Sixers games and being able to do some of those interviews. That for me is still kind of the peak moments of cool. Still a moment in my grind. And I still have plenty to go and plenty of directions I still want to take it. But being
For
able to
sure.
get there and get in that room was very cool to me and ask some questions to the James Hardens of the world, Tyrese Maxey, all those guys. So that for me is probably the pinnacle moment so far, and hopefully I blow past that at some point.
Now, were you like Howard asking and like asking like the tough questions or?
I won't lie and say I was going with the softballs for my first couple attempts there, but I did my best to keep it fair, keep it honest. I do think I got some decent questions in there, so it was all good and fun.
That's awesome. That's really really cool. Who was your favorite that you got to interview?
It's weird for a lot of those setting. It's very like the player comes out and all the reporters kind of asking at once, so
Oh,
you're
for
kind of
sure.
sticking it in
Yes.
the mix, trying to get in. James Harden to me was always interesting. That like it's interesting. Like Joel Embiid obviously is the superstar of this Sixers team, but he's almost such
Of
like
course.
a low profile guy that like the way that he just carries himself, you wouldn't guess that like obviously he's massive, a massive human being and very good at basketball, so you know that this guy's elite. But the way that like there's
Yes.
kind of an aura to James Harden surprised me. Like it is all the designer clothes, the puffy coats, the big boots and the chains on and all those things. So James Harden was always an interesting one to me because there was this presence and this aura about him when he was in the room and when he was answering questions that I don't really see from other guys. So I'll give Harden his respect there, and I thought he was it was cool the way that he carried himself and his kind of answers as well.
Now when you're in the locker room and there's like so many like reporters there, what was that feeling like when you were just doing that for your very first time?
Yeah, it was nerve wracking. I won't lie. That it was. There's a little bit of kind of the imposter syndrome of like, am I really supposed to be here right now, or how
Yeah.
am I? Do I belong in the room with these guys? But it's cool. But you just got to understand, like, you're there on business. This is a job for me in the same way that it is for all these guys. So to try to approach from that mindset, handle myself professionally, and kind of wait till later to reflect on how cool it was. I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I remember there was stuff that I was doing with the Delaware Bluecoats and, of course, like the Wilmington Blue Rocks when I was in college. And sometimes, I was like a little bit taken aback, and I was like, "Wow, this is for real." Like,
Yeah.
you get to be able to talk to some of these guys, and you get to be able to call games in person. It's just such a cool experience. And like the first moment that you're there, you're sort of like maybe starstruck is kind of like the word to say. Like it doesn't feel real, so like it has to kind of settle in for a little bit. So no, I think that's absolutely awesome. I do want to talk a little bit about the Sixers because of course we got to talk Sixers with Sean Barnard right here. You know what I'm saying? This man, I mean, look at all his tweets. I mean, I'll tell you this, man. Like when I'm prepping for games, I'm being like really serious when I say this. When I'm prepping for games, of course, like I'll go to ESPN and like I'll look at like some interviews and stuff like that, and I'll be doing my prep work that way. But I always go to Twitter, and every single time, man, I always think to myself, like, what does Sean Bernard have to say, like about like the shooting percentages, or just about like whatever stats are out there? Because every single time, I'm trying to like come up with different types of facts. I always have to I always have to make sure that I'm fact checking myself, and then I'm really just keeping up to date, obviously, with everything that's going on with the Sixers. And you do just such an incredible job at just making sure that you have like all your information together and everything. So I wanted to make sure that I give you your props for that.
Thank you, man. I appreciate that. And yeah, I do take some pride in the Twitter account, making sure I stay pretty active on there. And as much as there's all these platforms that seem to be ever growing and shifting and all those things, I'm still
It's
a guy
crazy.
that loves hopping on Twitter and ripping it out, letting tweets fly. So I try to do my best to stay on top of that, send some stats out, and yeah, I do like it quite a bit.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But just in regards to the Sixers team, my first question I wanted to ask you, okay, is there have been a lot of talks, of course, about the trade deadline coming up and whether or not the Sixers have to go after somebody. And I know that I know that so many people on here feel like that the Sixers have to have a backup point guard, or just like or just a combo guard with Tyrese Maxey. Do you think that that as currently constructed, okay, my first question is this team a contender?
I would say yes to contender. I
Okay.
think there's a little bit of a gap between them and the like. It's Celtics, Bucks, and then a little bit of a gap, and then Sixers in the Eastern Conference. I feel, but I think they're
Okay.
certified the third best team in the Eastern Conference, and they can stamp that pretty heavily. I still am of the mindset that there needs to be one move to elevate them into the true championship contender category. That I kind of think they're fringe on the mix of it right now. I still would consider them contenders just because Joel Embiid is, when he's playing his best, is the best basketball player in the world, and there's no eye for
Absolutely.
eye answer to that on any team around the NBA. So that gives
Yeah.
me enough hope there that if we can get one of those stretches, that they are still a contender. And the leap of Maxi, there's plenty of reasons why you can look at and feel positively about this team. I still think they're contenders and have a fighting chance, but still think they need to make one more move to kind of elevate themselves into that true category.
Now, is the move Laurie Markkinen, or do you think that do you think it's not one specific role? Do you think it's just a combination of roles?
Yeah, Laurie Markkinen would be ideal. That would be probably my number one guy. I think ultimately the
Number
price
one
tag
guy.
is gonna be a little too steep, and I think he probably continues spending his days in Utah. Frankly, I think that's the right decision from the Jazz perspective. That I
Yeah.
think he's worth building around, and I think it would be a poor decision to move on from him. But if he was available, I would absolutely love the Sixers hopped all over that. It's interesting that there's been so much talk about Daryl Morey speaking about this cap space plan and making sure to maintain flexibility for the offseason, not commit to contracts that have these long-term effects. So that
Right.
takes a lot of players off the options here. I understand the logic behind that. The Sixers want to put themselves in like a unique position to where they have an MVP caliber player, they have an upcoming star in Tyrese Maxey, and essentially a blank slate of the roster behind them. But I don't think you can prioritize that to the effect that you're basically throwing away this season. That you have a finite number of years when you have Joel Embiid in the prime of his career. I think it's important to maximize them year in and year out, every single year. And that applies to this season particularly. So I think that they should be going all in. DeJounte Murray's a guy that I'm inching closer towards getting fully on board with. That overall, not a massive fan of his game. And I think that he has some poor attitude, and I guess just the way that he plays, I don't love all the time. But I do think he checks a lot of boxes for what the Sixers team needs. The contract doesn't scare me as much as some of the Zach LaVine options and things like that. So I do think that DeJounte Murray is a guy I'm inching towards, and there's plenty of other supporting cast. The Bogdanovich archetype of players, Buddy Hield, players like that as well. So
Yeah.
a lot of options. I think things are going to heat up over these next couple weeks.
I was talking to DFJ Hoops the other day when I had him on for my post game show, and we were talking a little bit about Dejounte Murray, and I think that I kind of or I finally just let the mold gel a little bit, or just a marinate. I think that that's the right word. And I would honestly not mind having DeJounte Murray on my team. I know that he's not the best 3-point shooter, and that's like a flaw in his game, but I do know, and this is what happens. Like you and I both know that in the playoffs, that when Tyrese Maxey and Joel Embiid are your number 1 and 2 options, when you're going up against the Boston Celtics, the half court sets, man, like they change the entire game.
Yeah.
So if not Maxey, it has to be Embiid. But if not Maxey and Embiid, who else is going to step up? And
Hmm.
I just don't think I don't think that Kelly Oubre Jr. as great as he's been, as awesome as he is, okay, I just don't think that I can rely on him on every single night to be that number 3 option,
Yeah.
that number 3 go getter that can just score a bucket. I think that he's a really cool complementary piece, but I can't rely on that every single night. And I can't rely on Patrick Beverly to be that number 3 option either, of course. But I just really feel like that they need to go after somebody. Maybe DeJounte Murray's the thing. But here's the question that I've been dying to ask you, okay? As soon as I found out that you were coming on, I have to know this, okay? Is Tobias Harris getting traded?
I would say more likely this year than ever. I think, to be honest, if you asked me to place a bet yes or no today, I'm probably still taking the no option. That the debate here is, we know it feels like Tobias Harris has been in Philadelphia for 50 years at this point, that this contract
Yes,
has been around forever. And the light is finally at the end of the tunnel, that you can see that
it
this
is.
contract is coming off the books. And there is a lot of value in allowing that to happen, to free up that cap space, to give yourself this opportunity for the offseason. I think Daryl Morey is really weighing that option, and that's very appealing to him, to have that financial freedom. And as much as like Tobias is underwhelming to an extent as a player and not quite what the Sixers need, he's still an important player in this locker room. When you talk about
Sure.
maintaining continuity and keeping the locker room happy, keeping the vibes right, which I do think is to an extent relevant. So I think that I'm trending more towards he stays. And you got to think, like, from Maury's perspective, and I'll use Zach LaVine as an example here. Zach LaVine, with 4 more years remaining on his deal, close to $200 million, you would be sacrificing all that money by trading Tobias for him. So you're essentially putting yourself on the hook for more money down the line. I think Morey
Right.
is of the mindset of, there might be more value if we just allow this contract to expire, although that absolutely could change if the right player comes available.
Are they going to extend Tyrese Maxey's contract at the end of the season?
Yeah, yeah, they will, and everybody seems to be on the same page. So there's a little weird
Good.
loophole with the CBA, that by putting it off till this offseason, that with the bird rights and basically it gives the Sixers more cap space by waiting till this offseason. It also is going to work in Maxey's favor because he's obviously having a career here, a guy that is likely going to be an all-star, check a couple other boxes, because it also gets misconstrued. A max contract is not a max contract, is not a max
Right.
contract. That is not a
Right.
blanket statement for everybody. It's based on your qualifications, what you do on the court, all stars, accolades, all these things. So Maxey's price is going to go up after this year. He has a blank check attached to his name and will sign on the dotted lines for however much he earns. But yeah, he will be back. Everyone expects him to be in the long term in Philadelphia. It's been a great relationship, and hopefully he spends his entire career here.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to make sure that I asked you that question too, because honestly, like I've thought to myself for a little bit of time, like they have to keep him. I mean,
Yes.
they have got to lock him up because he
Mhm.
is just so valuable to this team. And I know that like over the last couple of years, like they had James Harden, and they wanted to make sure that they had him as like the number 2 option, I guess that you could say, behind Joel Embiid. But now, of course, that with Harden gone, you really have to make sure that you keep this kid because he is absolutely special and just continues to raise his ceiling every single year. I think that his ceiling potentially is higher than Joel Embiid's ceiling. But
Yeah,
that's just me.
that's a lot to say based on MVP. But the point that
Yeah,
I think is important to note with the Maxi things is, I think it extends the Joel Embiid window pretty significantly. That Joel Embiid,
absolutely.
obviously MVP of the league, one of the best players on the planet, and will go down as an all-time great. But I very much think there's a world where the best version of Joel Embiid as a basketball player is not him scoring 35 points per game, that it is him with a little
Right.
reduced offensive role, able to dominate defensively, put more effort in on the rebounding, and maybe he drops to like a 20-point per game guy. This is obviously several years down the line at this point. But if that is the case, and Maxi's a guy who steps up into more of the center stage of the offense, being a guy that does, like, is the engine of the team in a way that Embiid is clearly more of right now. I think there's a chance that still is conducive to winning and that the Sixers team maintains in that championship window. So none of that happens without Tyrese Maxey being available. I do think he's going to be pretty much a perennial all-star from here on out, and he just gets better and better day in and day out, year in and year out. So yeah, it's tough not to just full out gloat about this kid.
Speaking of getting better and better, I don't really think that we as a Sixers fan base or we as just guys that just are covering the NBA, like in regards to the Sixers, I don't always think that we take the whole totality of Joel Embiid's entire career into consideration. I mean, like when
Yeah.
you just look back at this guy, like he picked up a basketball not when he was 3, he picked it up when he was like 14 years old, which is just absolutely mind boggling to me still. How a guy could just pick up a basketball so late into his pretty much his teenage years and just not only go to college, not only go to the NBA, but to be the best player in the
Yeah.
NBA right now. And I just think that that's just so wild. And we don't always look at it from that perspective, and we just don't look at it from like we were comparing him to Greg Oden in the first couple of years in his career, and now look at how much further he's come.
Yeah, it's crazy to think that Joel Embiid has played more basketball at the NBA level than he did before making it to the NBA. That just to think about that is wild. And yeah, like that was a real thing that his first 2 years, which he obviously missed after being drafted, there was real talk about this guy might never play basketball. And to see him
Yeah,
not only get back on the court, but just develop into truly one of the most special athletes of all time is so impressive. And it's a testament to the work that he's put in, both from a physical standpoint, improving his game, the mental standpoint, the time he puts in watching film, analyzing game, that helps so much with his growth and IQ and everything else. And he truly does have a special ability to like watch things on film and just throw it into his game in a way that very few players can. It's really impressive. And yeah, I mean, he's an all-time great. He's an all-time great in the prime of his career. And I think that that should
absolutely.
be fully put on the table more often.
I was talking to Matt Murphy about this when I interviewed him yesterday, but I asked him what is something that people don't see like off the court that actually makes Joel Embiid even more special. And he was talking about how like after the games, he's always watching film. He's a student
Yeah.
of the game. He was watching the other day. He was watching the Denver Nuggets and seeing how teams are guarding Nikola Jokic, and it's just so impressive to me how just this guy is just playing at such a high level and is just always willing to get better, and he is really just always locked in,
Yeah.
whether it's on the court or off the court. But what do you think is something that, even though he's having an MVP level of a season, what do you think is kind of going a little bit unnoticed or like swept under the carpet about this season, if you will?
I I think the playmaking growth has not been put on center stage enough. That a guy averaging a career high in assists, jumping over 6 assists per game for the first time when 4.2 was his previous career high. That's a massive leap. That like to take that steps, and that's been the biggest hole in his game. That he's one of the truly most elite scorers of all time. That when you talk about his combination of size, the touch on his jumper, and then just the amount of ways that he can score, that his kryptonite has always been when teams throw the doubles and triples at him. That he's had a difficult time passing out of them or making defenses punish because of that. I think we're seeing those steps. And Nick Nurse deserves a ton of credit for this, for giving
Absolutely.
passes for Joel to make. That I think a lot of times, like Embiid wasn't as deficient as a passer as kind of the stats or some of the eye tests would indicate. A lot of it was there just weren't the passes there to make. That when the Doc Rivers offense has Joel Embiid at the elbow and all four other guys on the other side of the court, those are all really difficult passes to make and easy guys to double off.
Sure.
So when there's the motion, when there's down screens, guys coming, making back cuts, things like that, those are passes that Joel can find. So we're seeing that all be put on full display this year. It's elevated the Sixers offense as a whole, and Embiid deserves a ton of credit for having the willingness and ability to adjust to that.
I agree with you about the passing. I also believe too that his defense, I know that
Yeah.
it's gotten a lot of credit in years past, but I think that this year specifically, he's done such a really good job on the defensive side. I noticed that he's like one of the first people to always get back out there in the transition. And the cool thing about it is that in years past, because they didn't have those athletic wings, he would actually have to guard more of the perimeter. And now he's playing more as a rim protector on the defensive side, and he can still guard the perimeter. I think that underratedly, he can actually guard 1 through 5, and it's really impressive just to see him stay on top of smaller guards. But that's not an ideal role for him, and that's another
Mhm.
reason why he wasn't getting as many rebounds as he should be. So I
Yeah.
think that in regards to just this season, he's doing that more. And part of that is a testament to Nick Nurse, but it's also just because of the roster construction now. When you have guys like Robert Covington and when you have guys like Nick Batum and Kelly Oubre Jr., it's also a testament to them as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And the defense has always been something a little underrated in his game. I think it's tough to put it on full scale when we're talking about on the offensive side of the ball. This guy's leading the
I
NBA in
know.
scoring for the third consecutive season. But I
It's
do
just
feel
so
that
eye popping.
yes, yes, so eye-popping, and I do just think he deserves to be somewhat in that defensive player of the year conversation pretty much every year, that when he's locked in, I don't think that there's maybe 3 guys that are better defenders than a locked in Joel Embiid. Gobert and Jaren Jackson Jr. are probably the first 2 that popped to mind there, but Embiid very much in that same conversation as a shot blocker, a guy that is capable on the perimeter. He's a better perimeter defender than Rudy Gobert if we wanna make that comparison there, and we
1000%.
and yeah, and you mentioned a little bit Nurse deserving credit. One of the things that Nick Nurse talked about when he first got hired was I want more swings at it from Joel, of him going up to block shots, and that
Yep.
has produced positive results. That he's since his rookie year, his highest block totals, which those have been numbers that have dipped, and I don't take that as a full criticism. Some of that's a sign of respect that when you're known as a shot blocker, guys just don't try you the same amount. So I think Embiid
Right.
kind of proved that right away, and then hasn't had quite the same opportunity. And you still see that over the course of the games. The guys that will dribble out of a look under the basket and things like that. And that's very impactful. That I truly believe, regardless of the other 4 players on the court, that if Joel Embiid's there, it's going to be an above average defense. And there's very few players that you can say that about. Was one of the biggest points that I've always hammered in the Nikola Jokic versus Joel Embiid debate is he can just anchor a defense in a way that very few people can. And to pair that with his offensive ability, it really is special. So yeah, I would agree with you that defense goes under the radar as well.
I think I got all the gloating out of my system about Joel Embiid. It took a lot for me to just get that out because sometimes like I'm also a really big baseball fan too. So of course like watching Shohei Ohtani and watching these guys that are just playing at such a high level, like watching a Serena Williams and just like these top tier guys and these top tier players at the top of their sport. It's just always so much fun for me to watch and it's just absolutely eye popping and it's just incredible. So I got it all out of my system, Sean. I got it all out. but
Yeah, that's a good thing there. And it is good, like, I think with all the pressure, with all, like, the trophies and championship kinda era that we live on, sticking things to guys' legacy, it is important to every once in a while take a step back and just appreciate, like, the things that Joel Embiid is doing on the court, and the same with Shohei Ohtani and all these other great names that you mentioned. We just don't see this a lot. So, before we keep rushing, what's next? Gotta get that championship. Just take a second and be like, "Wow, look at the things he's doing." So, I think that's a great point as well.
do you think that Skip Bayless and some of these other journalists that are just out there for national attention, do you think that they kind of push that narrative a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, I think the state of sports media is not in a great space right now when we talk about some of the clickbaity stuff and some of the titles, misquotes, all these things that have become all too common. So I think as a whole that there's a lot of issues, and one of the unfortunate realities of kind of the business is like the good stuff does not always rise to the top. That sometimes
Right.
the substance is not as important as the framing or the way that things are brought up and things like that. And we know the hot take artists that have made a career off this. So it's unfortunate the way that the kind of the system has been created with these things, and what gets rewarded for is not always the right take or the most, I guess, meaningful and backed up take. But it is what it is. You got to kind of roll with it and make the most of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I do want to transition and shift gears a little bit and talk more about you because you're on here and you're on sharing the mic with JJ. So I got to talk to Sean Bernard, and I have to make sure that that we talk about the journey and we talk about the grind. So I think that the first question that we got to start off with is, when did your Sixers fandom start?
Lifelong that I was,
Lifelong.
yeah, born in South Jersey, have been a Sixers fan, all Philly sports my entire life, and then
Where in South Jersey, if you don't mind me asking?
yeah, Southampton, so right near the Medford area out there. So yeah, I went to
Voorhees.
Yeah, Voorhees. Okay, cool. Yeah, I went to Seneca High School, so out in this area
Nice.
here. But yeah, grew up a all Philly sports fan my whole life, and then have kind of did my best to turn into the professional route as I start to grow into the age.
Absolutely. Now you did go to Alvernia.
Mhm.
Now did they have? Did you graduate with a sports degree there?
I did not actually. I graduated with a healthcare science and healthcare administration degree. So I actually,
Really?
yeah, started out on the PT route, and then when the
Wow.
world fully shut down for COVID, that we all were trapped in our houses, that I kind of went the route as I think a lot of people did of let me try something new, let me figure something out, and started off writing my own blog, created my own website. That one thing led to another. Got connected with Philly Sports Network, and kind of have done my best to just continue down that path, continue the ball rolling, and jumped on every opportunity that I could.
That's so cool. Wow, that's really wild. I know that Matt Murphy, he graduated with a economics degree when when he was in school too. But I just think that that is just so wild how sometimes like you just like never know like what's
Yeah.
gonna happen and like what the universe brings, and I think that that's actually really wild. Now you also do writing too, so
Mhm.
I want to ask you, um, what's the emotion like when you feel like you write a really good article or just a really good piece in general and it's perceived and it has really good positive reinforcement?
Yeah, it's cool. I'll say like my Sixers writing specifically is probably the stuff that I've enjoyed the most when I actually get the time to just like have a thought, dive in, kind of bring up the stats that back me up and lay out my whole argument. That to me is kind of like the beauty of it and the way that it is great. I do these days I do a lot of kind of the betting writing and freelance writing, which I don't get as fired up about or feel quite the same emotions. But
Right,
gotta pay the bills and do what's necessary with that kind of stuff.
of
So
course.
but as far as the Sixers side of things, those are definitely the ones that like I'll feel accomplished when I submit one that I'm like that one turned out the way I wanted. So it is a cool feeling. I think writing kind of gets slept on as a the medium of I guess source of media at this point, and
It
we know
does.
with kind of the immediate gratification that we live in, that everyone would rather just hit a tweet or see an Instagram post or things like that. So it's tough to convert it to I guess the dollars and cents in the same way, but it is very cool to actually sit down and do it.
Is there a different approach that you take when it comes to writing on a betting piece, so, like compared to a Sixers piece? And if so, like how do you approach it?
Yeah, there's all different styles of writing with things. Like I kind of try to think about like what am I actually accomplishing in this written piece? Like what are my goals of this article before I do it? So for like a betting piece, like things that I'm obviously there to lay out the data and why I believe something, if I'm making a pick or making an argument or just breaking down two sides of a matchup, that is very much based in that of giving the stats, giving the laid out like that. If this is more of a piece, a Sixers piece, maybe a an article on why, DeJounte Murray is the missing piece that got to have the lead, got to have my data, and got to wrap it up in the way I see fit. So it's kind of nice, I think, at the beginning that each piece has a little bit different goal and each style of writing has a little bit different way to get there. So I think that's an important step that people should note that every single article there's a little bit different goal, outlook, and just overall approach to. So to sit down, center yourself, and realize that before you kind of put pen to paper or fingers to keyboard, like I think that's a good thing to do.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. I've definitely I know that I've been doing like a whole lot of stuff with like the YouTube stuff, but I do like want to get back into writing because I think that it's a really important thing, especially like when you're reading a lot of stuff, it's really important to just be able to put that pen to paper, and I think that that is honestly becoming more of a lost art, and I think that it's sad in a lot of ways because it's just something that is a it's a different medium,
Yeah.
and I just feel like that it's just something that can be really powerful.
Definitely. And one of the things that I've always said that like I've if you ask me my favorite, I probably would say I'd rather writing than the on-screen stuff. And my biggest reason that I've always said for that is the backspace button, that you're allowed to go back, edit things or get
Yeah,
things exactly how you want it. That when you're going through a piece, reading it
right,
through and figuring it out, that you can say, like, I want this to come out exactly like this, have a very
sure.
refined approach and have the article come out the way you want it. it's more difficult when you're doing stuff live or just hopping on the mic and spitting. So obviously, like
Absolutely.
that is takes a ton of talent, and you could argue is more difficult to get it right on the first try like that. But I always do like that about like written work. I feel like turns out more of an art than kind of some of the video stuff, which obviously there's production and after the fact stuff you can touch it up with, but it's just a different style, a different medium, as you mentioned. So yeah, it's interesting the differences there.
It is. No, absolutely. Now let's get into the YouTube game. So I wanted to so you brushed on it a little bit. You talked about how COVID was definitely a time where you felt like that this was honestly something that you wanted to take advantage of, and then you wanted to like try to, just get reps with just coming onto YouTube and stuff. But what do you think is a big misconception about just, you know, posting content, not even just on YouTube, but just even writing in sports media? What do you think is like a big misconception that a lot of people who are just looking from the outside in that they
Um,
have?
I guess like it all takes more time and work than I think people give it credit for. That each of these things, like it's not just, you show up, you record and you're out. That there's plenty of
Yeah,
legwork around it going in, whether it's scheduling stuff, whether it's doing the research, the data, all the graphics, thumbnails, descriptions, titling, all that stuff like matters. So I think
it
as a
does.
whole, it gets underappreciated, which is how much goes into things. And that applies to every avenue of this kind of stuff that like the product is the product, and by that it's the video or the article, things like that, but the actual process of getting it there, I think there's a lot more that goes into it than people recognize or realize. So I guess I would go with that there.
It's funny that you say that because when I'm calling my games, some people have asked me, do you just come on here and do you just talk for 3 hours? And I'm like,
I
not
wish.
really.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like the same sort of a thing, and people don't see that I have like different monitors over here, and that that I also try to do some prep work beforehand, and that everybody has their own way of just preparing and making sure that they come up with their talking points and all those types of things. So I always like to ask that type of a question because for our audience members, it's always interesting for them to learn about these types of things and really see that this in itself is an art. And in some ways, it's kind of like a sport too.
Yeah, yeah, it absolutely is. And like everyone, and I feel this way about everyone in life. Like one of, not to throw Nikola Jokic in here, but one of the things that I always hate, like I think is lame that comes off with like the don't care from Jokic is I think this applies to every lane of life, that you should want to be the best at what you do. You should take pride in your work and the product that you put out and what you do. So that applies to this as well, that you want to have the best possible results, the artwork to come out as you expect, and your takes and everything to be polished. So yeah, everyone should take pride in it, and I think that's important.
What now now I didn't ask you this, but did Pick Swap Media form during the pandemic?
It did, yeah. That started out
It
as
did.
Pick Swap Podcast, which was just me and my partner James Moraine doing that. So got connected with him through a friend of mine that he went to high school with. I went to college with this friend, so he was already in the Sixer space a little bit. He's since dropped out and works actually in the Flyers organization these days as a in the
Really?
ticket office there. So plenty going on for them right now. Uh, but
Yes.
but that eventually has kind of grown into a little more. That we've brought some other guys on. Shout out Ryan Coyle at Beef Up Front, the guys at Double Switch, a couple other guys that have come and go as far as the pick swap outlook. So yeah, that is kind of gradually morphed, but that was initially launched during the pandemic as well.
Oh, now you got me thinking about the Flyers and Cutter Gauthier going. Oh
Yeah.
my gosh. Ugh. It's tough. It's tough. Oh my gosh. I loved Cutter, but I do also want to ask you about how Edge of Philly Sports and how the Philly Sports Network, how those things came about and how those opportunities just y- how those opportunities just came.
Yeah, Philly Sports Network was first. That was way back after my first blog was called 267 Sports Corner, which I made on my own, was just full out writing on my own. So one of the writers at Philly Sports Network came across just my work on the web and we connected. He started DMing me on Twitter, and then one thing led to another that I shifted over to Philly Sports Network, completely write it. And then I was initially hired as a Phillies writer. So my first work on
Really?
them was all Philly stuff, which I love the Phils as well. So that was no chore by
Yeah,
any means. But then I
for sure.
started getting in the mix for Sixers stuff, gradually made that more and more my lane, which, as much as I love the Phillies, basketball is number one to me with that kind of thing. So that was cool to dive into fully that. And then Edge of Philly Sports, it was originally the Painted Lines. So originally connected them back in those days to where we started doing these post-game shows, just hopping on live after games, breaking things down. They've since shifted to Edge of Philly Sports. And from my extent with them and pretty much jumping in on post games, jumping into videos. But shout out Mr. Crockpot Dives over there, as well as Tiago and a bunch of the other guys that do some really awesome work. So some really impressive draft breakdown and other stuff they got going. So good people over there.
Yeah. You see, yeah, no, that's absolutely awesome. I had another thing that was literally in my head, and it literally just slipped out. Sometimes these things just happen to me, and I can't really understand why. Um, but I think that where I was gonna go next, honestly, was just talking about just like more of like the day to day and like how you like manage like how do you manage like the personal life like compared to just like the job, because I think that's something else that we don't really talk about and not a lot of people see is that this is not a 9 to 5 job. So
Yeah.
obviously when the Sixers play or when the Phillies play or when the Eagles play, it's just like working around the clock and making sure that you just like create your own structure. And I just like wanted to ask you like you don't have to like go like too deep into it, but like how do you balance it?
Yeah, it's not easy. That's honestly what I would say is probably one of the biggest challenges is because it is always essential to have some sort of work-life balance and make sure things and it's tough that like when you enjoy your work, which I obviously do in this situation, that like you still have to keep in mind like you got to give yourself that downtime. And like for
Yes.
example, my roles and my responsibilities have shifted as my work life has shifted. Like when I was working for Heavy Sports and being the on the beat reporter for the Sixers and going to games, like those would be nights where I would show up to the arena. They would do the opening press conference around 5:30. So I'd show up to the arena around 5, start to do the interviews with coaches, blast out some quotes, maybe write a piece if there's anything that relevant came out of that. Then obviously watch the game. Say the game goes to 7 to 10. By the time interviews are done after the game, it's like 11. Then I got to sit down, do all the uh, you know tweeting out those quotes, breaking down exactly what was said, and then right after that. So by the time I would actually be leaving the arena on games like that, it would be like 1 or 2 a.m. It's like a full hour ride home for me. So those would be late nights and things like
Yeah.
that are difficult. So when that, I think for me personally, I'm hard on myself with like I want to be up. I want to be Adam in the morning and try and act like I'm a morning person when in
Right.
reality, I'm just not. So sometimes you got to give yourself a little bit of slack that like if you're up working till midnight and things like that, that it's okay to sleep in a little bit the next day, that you're still getting the work in and you're running your own race at your own pace. So you got to find the balance. It is tough, but I think like being a little more understanding with myself has been something that's been good advice for me.
For those of you that are just tuning in, we're talking to Sean Barnard. He's the founder of Pick Swap Media, Sixers insider for Fox 102.5 The Gambler, and you can also find him on Edge of Philly Sports and the Philly Sports Network. I do think that it's interesting because I've noticed, okay, like when I'm doing more stuff like for my routine, something that's become more of a part of that is trying to take care of my voice, because I've noticed that like when I was calling games and when I was in college, I wasn't doing it every day. Like I was doing it for the radio station. I got involved with the radio station at Rowan, and I was maybe doing like 1 to 2 games a week. Like if if not like the most was probably like at once in a blue moon it was 3, but now that I'm doing this every day, I've noticed that it's really important for me to take care of my instrument and to take care of my voice. So I've been starting to drink some tea with some honey. And, sometimes you go with the green tea. Sometimes if it's like late at night, you want to go with something that's decaf. But I think that's something that I'm still trying to make sure that I have that a part of my routine as well, because it's really important to just, take care of the voice, because you got to work that out. And so I've been noticing that it's really that should have been like something that I should really be focusing on, because I don't want to have like my voice change, or like God forbid if I wasn't really able to talk again. I want to make sure that I'm taking the best care of it now. So I always think that it's important to ask about the hygiene and just about like the day-to-day stuff, because not a lot of people see that and not a lot of people know.
Yeah, and especially when the way that you do it with a full 3 hour by yourself, kind of going through the play by play, that's a lot. That's a lot of strain on the vocal muscles there. So
It
that's
is.
a great job taking care of that. And another word of advice to that is make sure you eat too. That sometimes I'm bad about
Yes.
that. That especially
Oh,
when things fall over the windows, that in the middle of meals or games like that gets difficult. But make sure you're taking care of yourself and eating something. So I've definitely had my pitfalls where I've forgotten about that at times, been zeroed in on work, and all of a sudden haven't eaten for like 12 hours. So not good,
You know,
not good advice there at all.
there was a couple of times where I would do like a double header like over the summer for the Phillies, or even the other week like on Christmas Day, where I literally did the Eagles and the Sixers game, and it was back to back. So
Yeah.
and I wasn't really feeling so well with my vocals, but I really tried to make sure that I conditioned myself. And literally after that second game, I was like, I don't know what I had. I think it was a cold, but I made sure that I just rested it like throughout the rest of the night. So
Yeah, you
um,
have to.
no, no, absolutely. But before I let you go, first of all, thank you so much for coming on here and for just taking time out of your busy day to just be on here with me. It really does mean a lot, man, for sure. But I do want to ask you before I let you go. Of course, there's people that are in our audience out there that always want to know about like advice or tips or anything that can help them in regards to just getting more involved with sports journalism, with writing, with news reporting, and with broadcasting. What would be something that Sean Bernard would say to all the people that are out there if they want to get more involved in the business?
Yeah, my number one advice would just be dive in, go do it. That like one of the beauties of modern technology, the world that we live in right now is you have all these mediums that you can build up on your own. That you don't need like to be hired to a job to all of a sudden be doing that. You just start writing on your own. If you make your own blog, or even if you're just making Word documents and build up a portfolio to then get your foot in the door somewhere, or if you want to do video content, you're never going to be perfect the first time. You're never going to be that great at it the first time you try it, but the most important part is to give effort and try. And you know what? Like I look back at stuff I've written in the past or when I first started or stuff that I said in the past or podcasts in the past, and it's like, that's terrible. Like that wasn't good at all. But you know what? I'm
I've been
hoping
there
that
too.
yeah, but I hope like 5 years from now, I look at the stuff that I'm doing right now and think like that was pretty crappy too. That like the stuff I do now is way better. So in order to evolve and to get better, you got to start somewhere. So that would be my number one advice is like it's intimidating to fully get involved and just jump in at the start, but you got to start somewhere. So whatever that means to you, whether it's creating your own platform, just creating a portfolio, beginning to whatever your lane or interest is, just go and start making something and take whatever steps it is, because everything in this world is one thing leads to another, or one opportunity opens up another door, things like that. So just go out there and get started is what I would say.
You got to start somewhere.
Yep.
I love that quote from Sean Bernard. Sean, man, once again, thank you so much for coming on here. Before I let you go, though, you got to plug in your socials. I want to make sure I give you the floor to do that.
Yeah, appreciate that. And yeah, awesome chopping it up. Appreciate the opportunity to have me on, chatting with you, of course. Respect your hustle as well and love watching the way you've grown of late. So can't wait to keep my eyes on that. And as far as for
Thank
me,
you.
you can follow me on Twitter at Sean_Bernard1. You can check out the written work on Philly Sports Network. Catch me on Fox Sports The Gambler 1025 every Saturdays 11 to 1, and then throughout the week on the Picks and Roll podcast with Sean Brace over there. And also, as we mentioned throughout on YouTube, you can check out Pick Swap Media. Check out Sixers Digest as well, and then the Fox the Gambler YouTube page. So a little bit of everywhere. But yeah, Twitter is probably the best way to keep tabs on me, and that's at Sean_Bernard1.
Well, you guys heard it from here. Make sure that you go follow Sean Bernard on all the socials, and definitely give my man some love. All right, that's going to wrap things up on this episode of Sharing the Mic with JJ. Thank you all so much for tuning in. I will see you all on the next one.